All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland, and our guest tonight is
A feel.
Benefiel. Benefiel. All right, all right. Um, when
It's
when
all
this,
downhill from here, folks.
Okay.
We just peaked with the level of quality we're
Well,
going to
I
have
mean,
in this.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
episode.
I'll fit right in.
to be fair, to give me a break, it is spelt oddly, and it's got I don't know. It's a spelling I've never seen before.
It looks to be
Well,
phonetic.
I'm quite unique, so.
All right. Let's start out with that. Let's start out with your uniqueness. I was reading your bio, and you have an interesting bio that seems to be somewhere between the metaphysical, for lack of a better word, and the business industrious. How would you put yourself in this world?
I play well in both worlds. Part of my metaphysical background meant that, hey, you've got to make it practical and pragmatic. So in order to do that, you have to practice it. And I love standing in the middle of chaos and creating order or facilitating order. I've done that most of my professional career. I started out in the aerospace industry as a production control coordinator in charge of $7 million a month in shipments and 800 part numbers. So, and then over the years, I got involved in doing partnering sessions for building road and bridge and waterway construction. It's actually pre-construction team building. So I'm standing in the middle of the room and literally fielding all of the comments from all the construction engineers and subcontractors and owners and operators and all that kind of stuff, and building the team so that they can function at a higher level when they actually get on the job.
This appears to be a weird combination for a person. I've always, as a creator,
I do weird well.
As a creator of things, I've always thought like the perfect person for what I do would be somebody who was capable of truly creating on a schedule, which seems so separate of one another. And it seems to me like when we think of metaphysical and we think of that stuff, we think of kind of up there in the clouds. But it seems like on a business level, you're very detail oriented, and so it's an interesting combination to put that together. Do you find yourself to be very different than a lot of people who do these things, or do I just have a very big misunderstanding of what this stuff is?
I stand out in the crowd as far as how I do things, and I'm very effective at what I do. I mean, I've done stuff for the DoD, Homeland Security, federal highways, municipalities, naval, NAVFAC, and Army Corps of Engineers. And I talk about metaphysical things in the language that they understand. And like getting signatures on the charter and goals and objectives, and talking about, being on the same page. Then I talk about jobarchy, being the job's the boss and everybody wins. And so there's this submission, right, to the project. And it's the same thing as if you were submitting to what is, right, where you're asking the appropriate questions and acquiescing to what those needs are.
Now, let me ask you this. Do you ever get a pushback from this more professional side when they find out about your metaphysical side? And also,
one would think so, but
that's the right word.
Yeah.
Correct me if that's not the right word, but
no, pushback's fine. There's all kinds of words that you could interject there.
I meant metaphysical. Is metaphysical the right word?
Oh, I'd say that's probably the most appropriate, because, but yet it's really, it boils down to bringing it back into the physical. And if you can't do that, then you really don't understand it.
I don't. So
okay.
That's why you're here.
Yeah. And I've worked my entire life to be able to do that, starting out, really young with the voice and hearing things and having experiences, and then having out-of-body experiences, and then trips to an orange cigar-shaped cloud during the night, a couple of years from the time I was 8 to 10, then an NDE at 18 that was just so profound as, the feeling that I had when I went into the light was, first of all, I realized I could think, so I wasn't dead. And the next thing was that it had this iridescent, effervescent feeling,
Hmm.
along with a really interesting frequency that kind of put it all together. So then coming out of that, that was in college in 1975. It was actually less than a week later than Travis had his experience, and we actually met years later and were friends. But then going from there to bringing that understanding back into a practical sense, and trust me, initially I was, it was a challenge. I ended up, not necessarily because of what I was talking about, but I got beat up at a frat house one night, ended up in the hospital. My parents decided that it was time to kind of shelter me for a little bit. So I ended up in the psych ward for a while.
Oh, wow.
That wasn't real pleasant, but I learned a lot from that and came out of it with severely depressed self-esteem and confidence level, and then built that back up again because I was an extrovert in high school. I did halftime shows on a trampoline in front of 5,000 people, right? So to return to that then gave me the impetus to really practice all the things that I learned and figuring out, okay, how do I need to do this? What do I need to learn? What kind of questions do I need to ask in order to garner the answers that I really need? And it boils down to the best questions, get the best answers. And you've got to be willing to test your truth. You got to put it on the shopping block and whack away at it. What stands, and what doesn't, you got to let go. And too often, we tend to cluster all of that and carry it forward with us when some of it doesn't work, and there's cognitive dissonance that we don't recognize until we have an experience where it shows up and went, oh, well, I thought this, and, but it's actually that, or I believe this, and then I find out that, oh, I'm getting in my own way, right? And so that's where the break between the metaphysical and the physical comes in, because we don't know how to fully condense into form.
Right.
One of the things I learned in the NDE is that we're cosmic consciousness condensed into form. We don't actually realize it, but we're becoming aware of that. Quantum physics is now kind of starting to prove that. So science and spirituality are starting this dance that's really wonderful, because it's proving each other. Unless we can do that, then neither really have value.
So let me ask you this. I know it's going to be a straight up question, and I understand if there are not straight up answers to some of these questions, but when we say that we're a cosmic consciousness, does that mean humans, or does that mean all of us? Like, is my dog somehow a part of this? Is this a connection of all life?
Well, we're all connected now.
Consciousness.
Everything is connected. Don't trust that atom. They make up everything, right? But the space in between is where the action takes place. That's where consciousness is. And so we're all connected through that. Now we have the ability of actually being cognitive and participatory, because that's how we're built. And that as we find out more, I'm of the impression that we have those genetic codes for higher capacity sensory perception, for instance, that turn on once we reach a certain level of activity in the world, where we've balanced our own ability and mindset and heart, mind, and all of those kinds of things. And it really starts in the first brain, from where the indigenous traditions start. They talk about the first brain. It's the gut. It's your intuition. That's where everything's connected. The vibratory realms, right? You can't think your way through a system built on vibration. You have to feel your way through it. So that's where it starts, is in the gut, and then we process upwards. Most of us start above the shoulders and forget about the body. We never pay attention to it.
Right.
And it's a transceiver. So all of this, if you can imagine a point of light is what we're condensed into, but it permeates every cell in our body. Now, on the other hand, that point of light is still connected to the great light, from which we go back and forth throughout many lifetimes. So, and as we garner that understanding then it allows us to actually participate more in the reality that we create. Most of us think we don't create anything, we just have to deal with what's in front of us. Well, it's a dance, you know, and the more self-aware you become, the better dance there is. You can ask for things and they'll show up, you know, and be careful what you ask for.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, the answer that it's a dance, I mean, I like it, but it is potentially a poetic answer, like me trying to forage for food in the wilderness without getting caught by a bear can be considered a dance. Is our connection here that we're talking about, is it built into us by something? Is it evolved, or is it a combination of the both? Or maybe you don't have an answer. Like I said, again, I'm asking. An answer. Okay.
I do have an answer, and it's multi-layered. One is that it's built in. Mm-hmm. The infinite intelligence that manages everything, we still haven't got the ability to comprehend. You know, Wilbert Smith, he was Canada's UFO investigator in the early 1950s, and there was a book that came out in '64 that was a compilation of some of his memoirs, and he had contact, he had discussions. One of the things that the people from elsewhere told him was that we don't understand nothingness.
Nothing. They said nothingness, as in the concept of nothing.
Right.
That's interesting.
And from which all things come, right? Mm-hmm. And that the unique factor that's ubiquitous is spin, and that each item of consciousness, if you will, is a point from which that spin determines your frequency and whatever, you know, and that determines your interactions, your life path, all of those kinds of things. But it starts from a very simple level.
So do we have, you know, I mean, there seems to be a lot of back and forth, both on the spiritual level and on the sort of quantum level. Mm-hmm. How much control of our lives do we actually have? Is there fate, or do we have complete control, or is there a combination of the two?
Well, there's a design. You know, I see it like this, that from what I can understand, what I read, my own experience, comparing it with others, there's this notion of a mission, right, that many people feel. Well, right. I equate that to having a perfected form, fit, and function in the world. Now, that turns that carbon-based being into a trinitized being, essentially, where it's connected with a for lack of better, divine function. And we say divine function because we can't explain it any other way, right?
Right.
When you say trinitized being, I'm not following that term. Sorry, what does that mean?
Like the Holy Trinity?
Well,
or what we would consider the Holy Trinity.
Okay, let me back up a little bit. I had a journey one time with my guide, and I questioned because Trinity exists at quite a number of different things. And so where did it come from? I had that question. And so he shows up, I'm getting ready to go into, at that time was called a multi-level awareness process that William Swigart developed back in the 50s as well. And it was 1989 when I went through it. And my guide, Zephyr, who I'd met in college, showed up, and he just says, come, and we're traveling through the universe. And he looks kind of weird. You know, he's this ball of light with a profile on the front of it, and he's got a Jimmy Durante nose. And so we're, and I think that was, you know, just to kind of put me at ease a little bit. But we're traveling, and we ended up at this 3-sun system with a dozen lush green looking planets in orbit around it. And we pause at the outside of it, and I feel like Jodie Foster in Contact, where, you know, she's just in awe of the beauty. And that's where I was at. And then I hear a voice, many is one, and it says, we are not only your forefathers, we are also the forefathers of your solar system. And so I start to ask questions like, what do you mean? You know, tell me. And Zephyr says, nope, that's it. You got all you need. You'll figure it out. So from that point, I backed it down into the micro and the proton, electron, and neutron. Right? So the carbon atom is our, you know, the 666. We think it's the number of the beast. Well, no, it's not. It's the number of man. And this is how that's all connected in a science way. So what initiates the man into his, what is it that the I Ching calls it, the prudent path for the superior man, I guess it's called. And that's where that understanding of those three, like spheres of consciousness that are integrated within us in the proton, electron, and neutron, and the consciousness in the space between manages the whole thing. And, you know, that's a very simplistic thing, and it's so complex in its activity. And yes, to answer your question, we do have manageability of our future because of how we think and feel and the behaviors that we have accordingly. I put it this way, it's what you put your attention, intention, and actions toward. And so it's like taking the law of attraction and putting it on steroids.
I see.
Well, we have that capacity, but we have to learn how to let go of all of our expectations, the unspoken, unfulfilled expectations that we have of life, and the anger and the frustration and all the kind of things that come up with that, and the unwillingness that we have to actually let go and submit to something greater than us. And that something greater is only what's within us, right? Because we manage everything with our head and we don't really pay attention to our heart and solar plexus in the activity that we have on a daily basis.
Right.
Right. Now, I'm obviously, I can speak to that point because of the variety of experiences that I've had in the corporate world and industry and all of that, and the exploration that I've had not only internally, but the conversations and experiences that I've had in other worlds.
Now, as far as like other worlds are concerned, I assume that these ideas are not separate of what we would call extraterrestrials. So extraterrestrials are, in all likelihood, if they're able to come here and leave, more advanced than us and capable of being connected to these things that we're striving to be connected to.
Right. And they're here to nurture us, and that's the only purpose. You know, there's a lot of conspiratorial theories, and they're all bunk. It's not my experience. Everything, and I've gone through this since I was a kid. I've met hundreds, dozens of races. None of them are in any way malevolent.
So there are no bad guys out there?
Nope.
Or at least on a cosmic traveling level?
Any advanced civilization has to go through a point where they realize they're dependent on each other, and that when you separate yourself from the whole, then you separate yourself, right? That's unnatural.
I see.
So our activity through all our religions and our separative notions and the bipolar paradigm that we're in and things of all that nature are unnatural. Natural order is oneness. And so now we're learning how to acquiesce to the fact that there is order in nature and there is a nature to order. And so in that natural order that we seek, it's like the process that Kardashev uses from advancing from a type 0, well, he didn't even call it a type 0, but advancing to a type 1 civilization and a type 2 and a type 3. And basically those are the type 1 utilizes planetary energy, type 2 utilizes the solar system energy, type 3 utilizes galactic energy, to put it succinctly and simply.
Right.
So we're in the process of planetary evolution, a big one right now. Whether we think COVID was instigated or initiated or whatever, it's giving us the opportunity for a great reset, and the obsession of self-hygiene and sequestration tends to, as a behavior modification process, turn inward, right? Mm-hmm. So eventually we go inside and go, wait a minute, I'm not happy. Why? What's going on? What do I need to do to facilitate change in my life to find the happiness that I know I crave and deserve?
Right. Yeah, my wife and I have spent a lot of time during this COVID shutdown situation doing exactly that, you know, thinking about making ourselves better, happier people.
Right. And it's tremendous opportunity. Klaus Schwab wrote a book called The COVID-19, The Great Reset. And you know who he is?
No, I don't.
He is the founder and executive director of the World Economic Forum.
Oh.
So I figured, my wife and I figured, okay, maybe it'd be good to know his point of view, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because the more points of view you know, the better choices you can make. So what he says, he has two questions that I'll focus on right now. One, for individuals, can we be compassionate and kind to one another coming out of COVID? And the second one for business is, can we be agile?
Right.
Can we be flexible? Because if we try to do things the old way, it won't work.
Right. Yeah.
Now that takes many forms.
Absolutely.
Right? Just on a basic level, that's the questions that he's asking. And I think they're very intelligent, forthright, and to the point questions that we need to consider for ourselves. And I find that I'm involved with peer advisory boards, and we have we've gone from in-person to virtual, and I helped negotiate that, doing Zoom meetings, things like that. So these are kinds of things that we're learning how to be agile. Right. There's been a lot of talk about that. Senge's work back in the 90s and the fifth discipline, systems thinking, self-mastery, all that kind of stuff applied in industry is now filtering out into education and our personal lives. And it's all, the same thing, the same themes are being presented everywhere, just with a slightly different language geared toward the audience that it's intended to reach.
It seems like all of this is based, from the business to the personal, is based in overcoming fear. Is fear what is holding us back from this, or is it habit, or is it something else?
It's fear of change, I believe. It's false evidence appearing real. We see things, we make assumptions, and we rescind, or we retract, or we're reticent to step forward. In high school, I was a platform diver, right?
That's
don't come easy, right? So
no matter how I land, I cannonball. So that is not.
Yeah, I'm hit. So when you consider that, it's that when you leave the platform, you're in a suspension, right? And by the time you hit the water, once you hit the water, and unless you hit it badly, right, then you realize, oh, that was cool. I want to do it again because of the rush, right?
Right.
Sure.
And not just the rush, but oftentimes the applause you get because you've done something cool, right?
Of course. Yeah.
That's the second factor. It's like playing music. When you're in front of an audience, you play much better because you're having that energetic exchange.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in the fear in addressing that is a door. So anytime there's legitimate fears, you don't want to step out in front of a bus, right? That's just ridiculous.
Of course.
The emotional fears that we have, the rejection, the denial, all the things, I've gone through all of that because of my experiences and my blabbermouth and wanting to talk about things and not really giving a shit what people think.
Sure.
Right? Because I know my experience. That's the only thing that I have to base my truth on.
Yeah.
And nobody can take that away from me.
Well, I feel that I've acquired some of that. I just haven't been able to decide if I acquired it through age or through actually getting better. Because as I get older, I give less and less
There's a maturation
crap.
process that goes along with it. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
My psychiatrist, when I went through the light, I had my NDE in college. I talked to them about it, and of course they sent me to a psychiatrist right away. And his name was Dr. Abel. So he was quite capable. And after the third visit, he says, you're not crazy. You've had a spiritual awakening. Why so young? I'm not sure. I was 18. Because most people don't go through it till the mid-40s, if they ever do. And I didn't realize what that meant at the time. But in my 40s, it's like, oh, empty nesters. I get it. right?
Or you have to redefine your life.
Right.
Yeah. That's where I am. I'm 45 and all my kids my youngest is 20, and my wife and I, a few years back, basically had to decide what we were going to do with our lives now that we were no longer needed by our children, you know.
That's one of the reasons why I became a transformational life coach. Because I've gone through these processes. I've got a master's, I've got an MBA, I've got an MA in organizational management. I've got a secondary teaching cert, hypnotherapy certification, and a transformational life coach certification to bring that all into focus in order to help people achieve their dreams.
Right.
My business happens to be the dream, right?
Yeah, well, I need to hire you. You know, I was going to a counselor, and I was coming home to my wife telling her that, you know, for one, he's not asking me hard enough questions. He's asking me questions that I've already asked of myself 1,000 times and not leading me in any sort of helpful way.
Mm-hmm.
I liked him very much, don't get me wrong. And I told her, I'm just all, you know, I might be more effective with a life coach than with a counselor. You know, somebody who has some level of accountability and also counsels you a little bit and says, what's your goals? Let's follow up on those accountabilities. Is that kind of what you're doing? Sort of.
Oh, yeah. Hey, true story. All right.
Yeah. Okay.
I met a chiropractor at a fundraiser for the Jerry Lewis telethon years ago and gave him my card. We talked a little bit. 7 years later, he calls me up and said, Zen, I think I'm finally ready for you. He'd been through 2 other business coaches that were just a data dump and didn't work for him. And so he finally reached out to me, and in 3 months, we increased his net revenue by 1/3. Just because of how I was able to focus and create an action plan for him to follow, right? Now, there are certain things in that process, the ways you think. I have a 13-page survey that I give before our first session, because I want to see how you write, how you think, the kinds of emotions or the lack of them that you use in your writing. And so it kind of gives me and there's multiple questions and things that give me that sense initially. And so when we have that first session, we go over and I figure out where, you know, where they're not quite being completely authentic. And so then we build our conversation on that part of their life around those things while we are building the action plan for them to actually do the things that they need to, because the mindset and the activity have to be congruent. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
So, you know, a lot of people, I think, would take spiritual awakening and spiritual growth over here and the acquisition of wealth and consider them to be contrary to one another.
Not at all. I mean, I'm not particularly a religious guy or a Bible thumper, but, you know, Jesus said, I had come that you could have life more abundantly, right? So it's built into the system. We are designed to have everything that we need. It's our fears and our resistance to others and our want for acquisition and territory and, you know, resources and all the kind of stuff that we think we have to fight over to get that have caused all the problems we have. And the guys upstairs are saying, hey, look, you guys need to learn to get along. You've got the resources. You know, the first thing that needs to happen is that you treat each other with compassion and kindness, because when you do that, then you open yourself up, you begin to feel vulnerable, you trust more, you have the ability to not be afraid of the unknown, and you move forward in that sense that it's all going to be okay, right?
Well, I like that attitude. That's for sure. I like the it's all going to be okay attitude. I need more of that.
I live that.
Yeah.
I've had to test that.
Well, you don't
right?
get the nickname Zen out of not living that Zen, I'm sure.
You want to know how I got it?
Yes.
Right?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so my given name is Bruce, means dweller of the thicket. I was adopted.
Mhm.
So I've
I
had
was
this
adopted too.
question. Cool.
Yeah.
I had this question, who am I? Right. And so summer of '88, I'm in front of my guest house with the renter, and he and I have just come back from a full moon meditation, vegetarian potluck and whatnot. So we're kind of high, right? And we're sitting there talking and about deep stuff. And our conversation falls quiet for a moment. And I go inside and I do the usual, who am I question. And I hear his chair move. I open my eyes up, turn to look at him, locked on his eyes. First words out of his mouth, "You are Zendor." Same, my second sight kicks on. I see this starscape with a huge stone arched doorway and a thick wooden door slowly opening toward me. And I hear "door to what is." Now, what the hell you do with that, right? So I stuck it on the shelf. 2 years later, I got the opportunity to host and produce a television show. We called it One World. I interviewed people on how they got where they were at, what prompted them from inner and outer perspectives, what fears they overcame, how they overcame them, or what fears they encountered and how they overcame them. Really, we did over 100 shows. About 6 shows in, I was nervous as hell to begin with because it was live to tape. There was no post-production. And so I had to be perfect. So once I started loosening up, that was about the 4th or 5th show. And by the 6th show, one of the guys on the crew was sick. And he called me Zen.
Oh, really?
What? And it just, so I used Zendor. I left the part out. I used Zendor as a subheading under my name, kind of a door to what is, because we were peering into the depths of what made people afraid, angry, ignorant, and immobile. Mm-hmm. And so by discovering that was a huge education for me. I mean, that was, like a triple PhD, because I had over 200 people that I talked to about similar things and gleaned that golden thread from that. So I was really resistant to, being called Zen for a while because I had issues with people when I was in college that were changing their names.
Oh, right.
And I never officially changed it, but I did adopt it because it just fit.
Nothing
right?
wrong
And
with
after a
it.
while, you just kind of acquiesce that, all right, I give up. You guys want it? You're going to call me that?
Sure. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, nothing wrong with a nickname. Nicknames are fun.
Tough one to live up to.
It is. I can imagine. Yeah, yeah. Earlier you were talking about the guys upstairs and making the decision of if we as a collective have gotten there.
Yeah, and I was going to ask about that book in the corner, your Council of 300 Galactic Federation thing. So I feel like
we're heading there,
going in the same direction. Yeah.
Yeah. Why some of us and not others? And is it not unlike, I always feel bad when I make science fiction references, but I mean, they help people understand. Is it like discovering warp power in Star Trek, where you get the warp power and now you're welcome into the Galactic Federation? Or is
it has to do with consciousness,
right? But is it similar like that? And why is it some of us and not all of us? Have I just not gotten there yet? And
soul progression, for lack of a better.
Okay.
We come in this, I think we can pretty much validate that, yeah, we have many lifetimes and we bounce, back and forth, not just from this planet, but others as well. We don't have those memories necessarily, and yet they're there. And at certain times we get promptings from them. Sometimes those even show up now with past life regressions. I've never really, and I'm a regressionist, and I have to be really careful because it's awful easy to give leading questions. And you can't do that because you can project into somebody's consciousness and they'll experience exactly what you want them to project or what you're projecting towards them and feed you back.
Susceptible at that moment.
Well, yeah, and not that they're trying to be or that you're trying to be, because that's not necessarily the case. You're not doing it in any kind of wanting to manipulate, right? It's just what happens. We're suggestible in that state. So I find that it's best to just explore on your own, ask the questions, and when things come up that are necessary, you'll get the information. It'll either be in a dream or vision or something, as long as you're paying attention. Most of us don't pay attention. It's that subtle impression that we ignore, right? the more you start paying attention to those subtle impressions, the greater your self-awareness will become, and the more synchronicities you'll experience as a result, because everything will start making sense, right? So then our job is to make sense common.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, we all get shocked now when things make sense. So obviously making sense is not common. Yeah.
Correct. And so, you know, as you can tell, I kind of like to have fun with it and framing things differently, because it ought to be fun.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes you got to get poetic in order to hit different people's attitudes and mindsets. And,
Sure.
you know, you got to deliver it in a way that is palatable.
Oh, yeah.
In
I came up one time, I was driving down the road thinking about how I could convert my just devastating divorce and leaving the corporate world and getting booted out of the church, and all of those things happened within 3 months. So I wanted to know, okay, how can I use this to transcend? And the idea popped into my head driving down the street. You know, I call it the suit trick now. I had on a set of artsy-fartsy kind of clothes underneath a 3-piece suit, and then I would talk about taking off the coat of armor, divesting ourselves, untying the knot, giving the shirt off our backs, having to lose the pants in the family, you know, all of those things. And there's actually a video on YouTube of that. It was from March 1991, and it's called Zen's The Stripper.
Well, that's some clickbait, right?
Or Zen's Mystic Moment, I think is what it's called. But Louis Russo, who introduced me, called me the Stripper.
That's funny.
And it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it gave me a chance to take that tragedy and turn it into triumph.
Yeah, that's great. Carrie, you said that you had some questions about the Council of 300 Galactic Federation, and I do too.
Yeah, I just wonder, you know, what does that mean? Is that just the same as who we were talking about earlier, sort of this cosmic consciousness, or is that like
and
a body within
what
it?
What are they federating? You know, what are they?
It's a little more defined. Well, federation basically is just a combined interspecies organization, right? And they're all of the level of consciousness where they're kind of like, Urantia calls them universe administrators, right? Where they help evolution,
right?
And in a positive way. You know, it's up to those that they're trying to help to make the choices to move up, because we can always make choices not to. Some of us,
yeah.
And that's where we're at right now in this great reset. We're given a choice, right? And so the Council 300, actually, I'm going to jump off a precipice, and hopefully you'll fly with me for a little bit. I was introduced.
Is that not what we do on this show?
Yeah. Well, I said that kind of tongue in cheek, right?
All right.
So in the late 80s, I was introduced to the Ashtar Command. I had questions about him. There was something in my gut that felt connected. I published my first article in a local newspaper, and right below it was a display ad for a couple that were channeling Ashtar and Athena. So I thought, interesting. I'm going to go check them out. Steve and April White were their names. And so I went to see them. There's about 100 people in the room. I sat several rows back and off to the sides so I'd be out of the way. And I'll be damned if both of them closed right at me as they were talking. It was obvious that they spent more time looking at me than around the room. And so I had the question, are you looking or am I imagining? And they'd open their eyes, both of them. And so I'm like, oh, you know, what kind of separate reality did I just step into?
Right.
Steve explained kind of the administrational side and what their purpose is, just kind of what I just explained. And then Athena talked about the community and more the emotional need of things. Well, I let that set for a while, and the more I questioned it, the more popped up. And I took my daughter. I was part of an organization called the New Age Alliance, and we had 35 member groups that came together to present the New Age in its better light of accountability and responsibility for our future, right? Individual as well as collective. So my job in there was to investigate the member groups that were wanting to join. So I went out to investigate a guy named Lauren Schmidt, who channeled Jabbar, and my daughter and I, who was 8 at the time, were sitting on his living room floor in the back. There was probably 35 people in the room, and he talks to a few other people in his trance medium state. He walks around, eyes open, and he walks up to me, looks me square in the eyes, and said, "You're still looking for your parents, aren't you?" All right, and I'm thinking, yeah, I'm adopted. I'm looking for them, and like, how the hell did you know, right?
Right.
And so I said, well, yeah, I kind of am. I've given up my terrestrial search because I exhausted it, and I, gave it up to the celestial. And he said, that's great, but you'd still like to know who they are, wouldn't you? And I'm like, well, yeah. And he said, would you like to know their names? And I said, well, sure. And so he says, okay, they are and is all I heard, right? I blocked it.
Oh, really?
Huh.
So all I heard was the beginning. So I had to turn to my daughter afterwards. I was embarrassed because I wanted to have this interaction, right? But I couldn't because I didn't hear it. I didn't want to say, excuse me, could you repeat that?
Right.
You're standing right in front of me.
Right.
And I turned to Crystal and I said, Crystal, what did he say? And she says, Ashtar and Athena.
What?
Weird.
Yeah.
Huh. So
I fought with that for a number of years and finally had to acquiesce to the possibility. I still didn't understand exactly how, but I acquiesced. So 10 years later, or actually a little more than 10 years later, I'm speaking at a conference, and the gals that are running the conference called me up at the end of it and announced me as Ashtar and Athena. Totally unexpected. And here it is, 250 people in the room from around the world gathered to talk about ETs and contact and all that kind of stuff. And yet part of me is like, okay, I guess I'm ready. And it felt all right. But there, it's like, okay, I'll step up. Don't know where it's going to go. And then that was in October of 2000. So February of 2001, I'd been having IRC chats. And after a chat one night, it was on a Tuesday, February 13th, I go to bed, but my mind is just, how you get when your mind is just vibrating. And it's like you've been to a concert and you're still hearing the, ringing in your ears.
Right.
Yeah.
So I open my eyes and I'm on board. I'm a stage and there's an auditorium with 300 different ETs sitting. Bodies, all kind just was bizarre. And I'm emceeing, introducing people, talking about the sequence contact and what they've been doing, and introducing the various that would come up and explain their side of things. And this happened 4 nights in a row. And at the end of it, I'm given this plaque that I drew. I've never had one made, but it was like their symbol of thank you. So that's what the book is about. It is what they shared with me. Now, I realize that could be just a totally incredulous event, right? And to a lot of people would seem that way. Now, it was so real and evidenced a decade later by Grant Cameron, because he started doing the research, looking at all the patterns and how things were transpiring and the cycles of contact and the types of contact and all that kind of stuff. So it was like, okay, it's filtering through. And those are the kinds of things that are evidentiary that can lead us into some new awareness. But the resistance is to actually talking about that openly without having the dismissal and the denial and the core of the listener, right? Just opening up to the possibilities. And it's kind of cool. One of my LinkedIn contacts, Dudley Lynch, who wrote several books, one called Strategy of the Dolphin and another called Mother of All Minds. He does corporate organizational surveys, right? And he wrote a review for me after some work I did with him, and he called me a possibilities coagulator. And I thought, wow, man, that's differentiating, because you think about coagulation, right? You bring things together. And so essentially what we do is we bring from nothingness, we call it ether, we've called it whatever, right? Precipitation, I think, is another word that's used. But we have that ability. Sometimes it takes longer. One of the things that happened for me, as an example, 1990, I'm starting the show. I have two guys that I want to emulate, Bill Moyers and Jeff Mishlove. And I hoped at some point to be worthy of an interview with one of them. 28 years later, Jeff reaches out to me through Ufology Press with a voicemail. I recognize his voice, and I'm like, wow! And he'd had an interview with Jason Giordani about the Greys, and he thought my audience would love it. And so he reached out to me. And so I watched the interview, wrote an article, posted it, sent the link to him, sent a PDF copy of this book right here, Stubbing My Toe on Purpose. 3 days later, he writes back, hey, would you like to come talk about it? So for the first time ever, I got to talk about the New World Order in the way that I understand it. And it was his suggestion. So we talked about all the frequencies and differentiation, all that kind of stuff. Then the second interview was on the sociology of ufology. And the third was on hearing voices, right? Because we all hear them. Sometimes, usually they're our own, but sometimes they're not. And we've got to realize that, in this, thoughts are not substance, right? They can go through anything.
Right.
And those that have the ability to think or at least consider that telepathy is an option we want to explore, there are things that can happen, bilocation, even teleportation. I've had experiences of all of those. So I know they're possible. Now, the repeating of the teleportation, I don't even care at this point because it's not necessary. But being able to show up and talk to people in college, my first experience with bilocation, we'd had a small cadre of people that were telepathically inclined. And so we did a bunch of experiments. And one night, this guy's name's Gary, he had gone at the end of the previous school year, he'd gone to Canada to spend the summer with his grandfather. He hadn't come back yet, and we were 2 weeks out of winter quarter. So I'm thinking, I got to reach out. I've been calling his parents to find out when he was going to be back. They didn't know. So I lay down. I put the music on, and you might remember these, a band called White Witch, and to a song called Help Me Lord. And so I laid down, closed my eyes. I went through the process of imagining his face and looking into his eyes. That's how we initiated our communication, right? And so then I imagine grabbing him by the shoulders and standing him up in front of me. So I move back. I can see his entire body. We begin the conversation, and then the girl that we both hung out with entered the previous year, entered the conversation. We hadn't heard anything from her since the previous year at all. So we have the conversation, and then the song ends. I come back, and that was a Saturday morning. The following Friday, I call his home to see if he's home yet. Out of breath, and he says, "Man, I was you on the phone, so I ran in. I just got home." I'm like, cool. All right, we're still connected. So I go over to pick him up. A couple hours later, we have a short conversation with his parents. We get out in my car. I turned to him and I said, "Hey, did you catch any flack last weekend?" "Shut up." And he looks at me and says, "Yeah, you son of a bitch. You woke me up out of bed." And I'm like, "What?" He said, "Yeah, I was sound asleep. I felt somebody grab my shoulders, sit me up in bed. I opened my eyes up. There was your face. Behind your face was Carolyn's. We talked for a while. You split. I went back to bed." Week and a half later, he got a postcard from a Krishna camp in California. Their standard, postcards had all the addresses up and down the coast. It had Santa Barbara circled, and on the back of it, in Carolyn's handwriting, "Enjoyed the conversation."
Oh, that's
I
wild.
was in Muncie, Indiana. He was in Canada. She was in Santa Barbara.
Huh.
Now, and I was 19,
Right.
Yeah.
right? So knowing those things are possible and then going into a professional life, that's a real challenge because you know how things can be. But when we go in and cancel the but, and when we go into the professional world or marriages, relationships, and things like that, then we have attachments and responsibilities that we are afraid of not fulfilling.
Right.
And so that gives us the reticence to not explore, or the reticence to explore, I guess.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly.
In
Did I answer your question, Kara?
Yeah, I think so. I think I
Well,
was just curious about the book title, so that clears it up for me. But,
yeah, I kind of went way beyond that.
yeah, there was a lot of good stuff in there.
That's what we do here. That's what
we meander.
I'm not sure time we talk about this stuff, I have enough of a background and credibility that I don't care. The more we talk about this, the more vulnerable we can be, and the more trusting and better relationships we can develop. And, it's time.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have too much longer till the end, but I want
Speaking
to.
of, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Speaking
totally.
of time.
I do want to ask you, in this discussion, we've talked a lot about spirituality and metaphysicalness.
Mhm.
And then we've talked about, and then the grays came up, so when we're talking about extraterrestrials, are we talking about physiological beings, or are we talking about energies, or are we talking about both?
All the above.
Mhm.
Because there are so many, here's an example. William Swigard, I'll refer to him again. He figured out how to do the multi-plane or multi-level awareness, and then there's also a multi-plane awareness that it's a process that takes you through 9 planes of consciousness and integrates the bodies that you have on each one of those planes. Now, I have a recording of that your listeners can find on, if they just search for solfeggio and multi-plane, that video will come up. It's an hour and 20 minutes long, and it's a wild ride, I have to say. So knowing that creation is multi-tiered or more multi-layered, it's kind of broken down in bandwidths like frequency ranges. And each one of those frequency ranges has a certain permeability and materiality on those levels. So the closer we are to the physical dimension, there are those who have advanced technology that can travel and have remained in physical form. And then there are other dimensions where there are less constrictions on the materiality, and consciousness can actually or is malleable enough and presentable enough that it can take whatever forms necessary in order to communicate with us.
And so theoretically, we're getting all kinds here on Earth.
Right.
Yeah.
And not theoretically.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm evidence of it. And I know there are others like me.
Sure.
Probably not willing to come out and talk like I do, but that's happening.
I like to couch it in those terms because we get lots of guests on. They have lots of different things. I don't want to. Oh God, someone else is gonna listen. A past guest we've had, and they're like, "Oh, that's not right," and I'm just like, I don't
Well, yeah,
know.
you're
Maybe
designed
I'm
to
insecure
actually
about
explore the
that.
weird.
Yeah.
Right? You relish the weird.
Yeah,
Uh,
we
Yeah,
definitely do.
exactly.
yeah.
Or what the world labels as weird. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
view it as weird because everybody's
You know,
got
I
their
try to
own
come up with
brand
a
of
bunch of
weird.
acronyms for.
Everybody's got their own brand of
Mhm.
weird that, and I like them all. So, one thing that I'm always interested in, and Andrea knows this. Oh, I did want to ask you this. I'm a musician, you're a musician. You
Mhm.
talk a lot about frequencies and planes. Does music have a higher purpose, a higher influence, or something because of these frequencies, or is that just a parallel that you're using to help explain it?
Oh no, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, music is the language of the soul,
Sure. Yeah.
right? That's
Yeah.
true.
Uh,
You have guys like, uh, you know, classical composers who were blind and still wrote amazing music, and it moves us like unimaginably so.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Beethoven was deaf. He had to lay his head against his
Right.
piano.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's what I meant. I was talking about
Yeah,
Beethoven.
yeah.
I'm now
Yeah.
deaf, right? Yeah, kind of hard to do when you're blind. But those kinds of things. Luba, my wife, her early training, one of the first things that they taught her was the solfeggio scale.
Mhm.
Right? We don't use that. And now I do use the solfeggio scale in that multiplane awareness technique
Mhm.
because it fits. There's 9 tones. It fits with the 9 planes. Even Howard Neppy or Vernon Neppy and Edward Close came up with a model of consciousness called the triadic dimensional distinction vorticular paradigm,
Yeah, that makes
T-
sense.
TDVP for short,
Right.
right? And so and these are physicists. One is a medical doctor, one's a physicist. And so they say that consciousness, space, and time are tethered across 9 dimensions.
Hmm.
So there's that 9 dimensions again. So what I find is that the more you can find relation, the more likely it is that it is so.
Right.
Well, maybe that's the problem with society today, because I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard in ancient Greece that the Ionian mode of the major scale was the mode that they considered to be the one that could cause insanity. And that's what most music is written in today. So,
440 instead of
Dip out of
432,
here, guys.
in other words.
yeah.
A good talk.
I don't know. Oh, we lost Kara.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. We are pretty much at the end here, and I do want to make sure that there is a chance for you to tell our audience where they can find out more about you, and get their hands on your books. I assume that they can get them at Amazon, but is that the preferred place for them to go?
Yeah, that's probably the best place. I do have my personal website, zenbenefiel.com, has most of what I do on it, and it's got buttons across the top with different websites and all the different things that I do.
That's your hub.
Yeah, that's kind of my hub. I was talking with a guy named Winifred Barton up in Canada years ago, and it's back in 2000. She says, we need to make, like personal profile websites. Right? And I resisted it for a long time and finally did. And there's also a page on there that's, I think in the menu, it says PIF, which stands for paying it forward. And I give away half a dozen different titles from that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I've really had a lot of fun talking to you because, I don't know. I like a deep thinker, and Zen, you're a deep thinker, and I've had a lot of fun talking to you. So hopefully we asked good enough questions that you felt that we inspired you to think deeply for us, and hopefully if ever you got a new book coming out. You think about coming on Radio Wasteland again?
Well, one that I just published was the Ufology Press compilation. So it's almost a decade worth of blogs, which is all kinds of different considerations and experiences and things like that. It's 8 by 10, 250 pages.
Oh, that's a commitment. Yeah. I mean, to create, it's a commitment.
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's just once that creative, and whether it's music or writing or websites, graphics, events. I mean, I've been involved in huge 250,000 patrons at one event that I helped put on here in Tempe for a decade.
Oh, I used to live
one night.
I used to live in Tempe. I lived in Mesa.
Oh yeah, well, I'm talking about the New Year's Eve block party, right? And I was one of the coordinators for the Tempe Arts Festivals. I had 350 vendors and 20 food vendors in my area.
Awesome. I loved living down there. One of my best friends from growing up heads up a tattoo shop down there. And I hope that when all this is over, I'll be down there again. So maybe we'll see each other in person.
You better.
Yeah, you've been listening to Zen Benefiel here on Radio Wasteland. Again, your website is zenbenefiel.com.
Correct.
And that last name is spelled Benefiel.com. And again, thank you very much for being on.
Well, thank you, Chancey, for the opportunity. It was a pleasure.